I think we see in Jesus a God who is comfortable and present in the messiness of grief. And I think that is, I believe Jesus is our roadmap. And so we don't see that toxic positivity. And by which I mean, like just pretending that everything's going to be fine. I was raised to some extent to really deny hard feelings. And I just don't think that is not the kingdom of God living through us. That is avoidance, and that is, numbing, and the things that don't allow us to actually tackle and work through and wrestle with our actual bodies and our actual feelings. And, it just kind of removes us from the equation in some ways. And so I'm just here to plead with us to get a little better, to require ourselves to get a little more comfortable with that discomfort of grief.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Faith Roundtable. I'm Josh Burtram. I'm Pastor Josh Burtram. I am your host here on the Faith Roundtable and also co-host on the Faithful Politics Podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Join our Patreon. Go to the Substack. Do that stuff. Why? Because we get you great material from experts and well-researched material trying to give you an alternative to the craziness that is out there right now on both sides. And so here on the Faith Roundtable, what we want to do is we want to explore the intersection of faith and culture by talking to people who are experts in their subject matter. Today, we're talking with Shannan Martin. She's written a book that names grief honestly, and we're going to talk about it. She is an author, speaker, and essayist whose work explores how faith is formed through ordinary life, honest lament, and embodied hope. She's the author of The Ministry of Ordinary Places, Start With Hello, and Falling Free, and we're talking with her about her latest book, Counterweights. Why can't I talk today, Shannan?
That's okay.
Counterweights, which invites readers to practice hope without denial in a heavy world. Shannan, thanks for being here to talk about your book, Counterweights. And I got to ask, why did you write a book about such a heavy topic? There's so much heavy stuff out there. We need rainbows and sunshines and to avoid reality, right?
Right. Well, the good news is my book, Counterweights, offers both. Because I truly believe, just in my own life and my own practice and my own lens on this world, I believe that they both deserve our sacred attention. I don't really adhere to the idea of, toxic positivity or just simply counting our blessings.
What about toxic empathy?
Yeah, that's a whole
Do you
other
like how I
rabbit
said
trail.
that one on?
Yeah. Well done. We can talk about that if you'd like to.
Toxic positivity, yes.
Yeah, there can be the tendency in faith spaces to, I hear a lot, especially from women. That's predominantly my audience, but not exclusively. This idea of, I just want to focus on the positive. I just want to focus on joy. I just, I'm not thinking about all of this negativity. I understand that impulse, and as a white woman
Very
raised
natural,
in the
right?
yeah, I mean, I was taught to do that and to be that.
Yes.
And so I am here offering a third way. I am here to say, in Counterweights, we
Good.
can do both. We can be very honest about the stuff that is breaking our hearts and the stuff that is causing pain to ourselves and our neighbors, and we can also put some emphasis on the fact that we still, in spite of everything, in spite of all the ways this world is kind of breaking our hearts, we still love our life, and we only get to do this particular thing. Being a human here on this earth, we only get to do this once. And so how do we carry both? How do we load it onto ourselves so that we can carry the things that are hard and painful, the things that we would never have asked for, while also carrying with a lot of tenderness and gratitude the things that still keep us really in love with our lives?
And I really appreciate you writing the book. And I'd love to hear what was going on in your life personally, spiritually, that make, because right, all of us, unless it's just like, hey, this is the book that we have to keep writing because we're just writers and we just got to
Right.
write,
Yeah.
which sometimes that happens and that's fine. But most books, they have some kind of impetus, something
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
is something realized over time and like, man, this needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
What was going on in your life that made you realize this book needs to come out
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. I mean, I will say, just as a note, this is my fourth book, and my books are quite spaced out more than maybe a lot of
Mm,
Christian authors. There is the pressure to sort of crank out content.
yes.
All four of my books come from a deeply lived experience. I am writing
Mm,
about where my 2 feet are standing, and my actual neighborhood. I'm writing from the street in a lot of ways. And so I take my time, and I don't allow myself to feel that pressure, to feel rushed to just simply create something, but to allow God's Spirit to move in me, to the point that I'm sort of, in many ways, I can be a gut driven person. And so
hmm
for me, I know when it is time. I know when there is something to be said. And as I sat through, the past 3 or 4 years, I myself was struggling to carry the heaviness with the lightness and the joy. I would sometimes, fall into that trap of feeling like everything was an emergency and everything was terrible, and it always would be, which I don't believe is true. I would fall into the trap of thinking, if I was really enjoying something or happy, having a great day, really um, present to the goodness that was happening around me, then I might feel some guilt about that. I was just kind of
Hmm.
ricocheting between these
Hmm.
2 poles of, either everything is terrible or, we're just gonna focus on this good stuff. And I knew through my own history and through my own context that I've come to really believe, thanks largely to my neighbors, that the abundant life that we're promised as people of faith means that we don't just get the good things, we get it all. And so that
Hmm.
is the essence of abundance, is not just the things that we want. Abundance means you get everything. And
Hmm.
so here I was, kind of struggling to carry all of the complexity that my life in this world was offering to me. And I kind of reverted back to an old rhythm from when I was a child, and I give my dad credit for this. I grew up not as a my dad was not a farmer, but we lived out in the country. We did farmy sorts of things, and I remember my dad telling me at a very young age, if you have something very heavy to carry, the easiest way, though it seems sort of counterintuitive, the easiest way to carry something heavy is to carry something equally heavy in the other hand. And this doesn't
Hmm.
seem like it should make sense. And my dad is like a blue collar, manual laborer. He's a
Right.
very practical man, and he was just talking about, like, carrying buckets of grain or cinder block or whatever, but stacks of wood
Hmm.
for the fireplace. If you load both sides equally, it allows you to stay upright and to keep moving forward. And so I took that analogy from my practical dad, Dwight, and I
I
started to
love
just
that.
apply it to my daily life. Like, okay, on this side, if you sort of picture each of us as a scale, on this side we have all of this heavy stuff that we don't quite know how to carry, but we have this other side of the scale that we can choose to intentionally load with the good things that are already happening around us.
Hmm.
And it doesn't mean that, the good stuff can never outweigh the bad. It's not about achieving some sort of perfect balance. But what it is saying is, I have to pick myself up and stay upright and keep breathing and moving through the chaos, when we can get a little more intentional about being mindful of the good stuff that's already happening and always happening around us. Those are our counterweights, and those are the things that help keep us going, so that, as a person who is very justice minded, I cannot work towards justice if I
Hmm.
can't stand upright. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
if I am emotionally, like, in the bed
Yeah, I do.
because I can't do it, I'm maxed out, I'm at capacity, I can't take it anymore, I cannot operate in my own calling if I allow myself to fall too deeply into that. And so I just started looking around every day, and I still say every day to myself, what are my counterweights? This is the stuff I'm facing. Sometimes it's really global, sometimes it's national, sometimes it's very personal. Usually it's all of the above. What are my counterweights right now that I can grab onto and keep going?
Yeah, I really like that concept. I love the analogy. I love the metaphor. I want to dig into it more for our audience here. You like how do you define counterweight?
Mhm.
Like for our audience, again, there are examples, and I think giving those examples as you started to do, but that's
Mhm.
really important. But
Yeah,
maybe what's the operational kind of definition of a counterweight?
sure.
And because I get it when I'm thinking about if I'm holding a bucket here, I get another
Yeah.
bucket. I can visualize that, but we're obviously talking about things that are emotional
Yeah.
and spiritual. So what does that counterweight look like? And maybe
Yeah.
we can kind of draw out like some of these different ways that we try to deal with it instead of having counterweights like
Yeah.
toxic positivity, or maybe
Right.
you don't agree with the but
Yeah.
positivity,
Yeah.
distraction, or even numbing. So
Yeah.
maybe we can, yeah, if you
Yeah.
could help us understand even
I'd love
more.
to. I mean, I think the good news is most of us are already doing this on some level, but at the point that we can name it, just for me, giving it the name, and I kind of stumbled
Hmm.
into this, but naming it counterweights, it is a visual word that reminds us that the weight is still there. And I think that's really important. And I come back to that again and again. We cannot counter what we will not weigh. And so this is built into that word counterweights is the reminder that we have to keep being honest and honestly naming and weighing the stuff that is difficult, the weights, okay? But I think most of us are we're looking for rescue throughout our days. We are looking for joy. We are looking for a moment that might feel lighter, a moment where we can feel uplifted and positive, and all the things that we would rather be feeling than, bogged down and heavy and this is too hard, it's too much. We're already looking for those things, but once we start that intentional practice of naming our counterweights, it locks something into place that makes it a little more official. Sometimes just naming the thing helps us to put it into practice more. That's what I'm hoping to do, and that's what works for me by naming these counterweights. As far as what are counterweights, they are super unique. They are very case by case and individual. For me, they're often pretty weird. They're little things that might be overlooked. They are. I'm not a big fan of the kind of self-care narrative where the answer to this is to go out and spend hundreds of dollars on a spa day. That's not something that is accessible to me, and I know it's not accessible to most people. It's not about buying or consuming. I mean, sometimes, like, a little treat is nice, right? I'm not gonna discount that, but
Sure.
but by and large, I think counterweights are accessible to everyone. One of my most reliable counterweights is paying attention to the sky, like literally watching to see what is happening in the cosmos around us. It has become sort of a rhythm that reminds me of my groundedness in this big world, my small place in this big world. It reminds me of God and God's power and love. It reminds me that we're all here together under this same sky. And so it might sound kind of silly, but that has become a counterweight for me. The in the book Counterweights, I wrote through a lot of the weights I was feeling. And, we kind of touched on that a moment ago, but, I write about some things that are very communal and large in scope,
Hmm.
and I write about some things that are deeply personal that were happening in my life. And I'm just going to rattle off a few of the counterweights I
Hmm.
wrote about just to give an idea. I wrote about how thrifting, buying stuff at the thrift store almost exclusively,
Hmm.
has become a counterweight for me. Prayer and the ways that I pray, though I often feel like they're not quite right, or I'm doing something maybe not in the right Christian way, talking about that honestly and still knowing that prayer is a very important counterweight for me. Um, I wrote about the very simple. Some of these are more, they're bigger and some are very small, but just the intentional act of choosing the mug that I want to drink my tea from each morning, like reminding ourselves that there's so much outside of our control, but there are these tiny little things throughout our day where we have a say. We can choose to, I'm a very visual person, I'm creative, and so that teacup thing is not gonna be for everybody, but for me, saying, "Okay, here are all my options. Which one do I want today and why?" I mean, that's become like an important little rhythm to start my day.
I like that. And there are these like behaviors, right? Things that we can do that can intentionally provide some kind of opposition to the stress or the things that we're in, or, right? Yeah, something to help us through that. I really like
Yeah.
that. And they really have these counterweights or use this counterweight if we refuse to grieve.
Yeah.
Um, what's going on there? Why is grief
Mhm.
like why do you think grief is not optional when it
Yeah.
comes to getting the counterweight for hope? Because that's what we want, right? The
Yeah.
counterweight.
Yeah, I love that you kind of keyed into that. I did write a good little bit about grief because I believe grief is the counterweight to loss.
Hmm.
And I believe that
Hmm,
a lot of what I've seen, particularly from my own sort of Christian upbringing, is a resistance to grieving. This push to
definitely.
we're gonna just have a celebration of life. And I know that can be very, very meaningful to a lot of people. And I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think to the extent that we intentionally bypass the process of grief, the gift of grief, the necessity of grief, we're not doing ourselves any favors. And we just can't, like I said a moment ago, you can't counter what you don't weigh. And so if we are not really taking the time to weigh that loss through grief, I just don't think we really can move through it or move, in the flow of it. And so for me, it's become really important as tragedy happens, as heartbreak happens, to just very honestly say, "This is hard. This has broken my heart. This has wounded me," whatever the case may be, and to sit in that, to really allow myself to be comforted by God, who I believe is present in our hardest, most painful moments in a way that does not require them to be shined up or spruced up or, like sand off the rough edges. I think we see in Jesus a God who is comfortable and present in the messiness of grief. And I think that is, I believe Jesus is our roadmap. And so we don't see that toxic positivity, and by which I mean, like just pretending that everything's gonna be fine. I was raised to some extent to really deny hard feelings, and I just don't think that that is not the kingdom of God living through us. That is avoidance, and that is, numbing, and the things that don't allow us to actually tackle and work through and wrestle with our actual bodies and our actual feelings, and it just kind of removes us from the equation in some ways. And so I'm just here to plead with us to get a little better, to require ourselves to get a little more comfortable with that discomfort of grief.
Yeah, you say it's not a crisis. That's one of the points that you make that and that our response to it is. I think that's so fascinating because, and I want to hear what you
Hmm.
unpack that for our audience, but um, I think that's so important to think about the idea, like to separate grief from the crisis itself and
Hmm.
from our behaviors within it, right?
Yeah.
Saying, so it's like we try to avoid grief, but grief isn't the thing that we should be avoiding, right? Because grief is just the
Yeah.
response to the
That's
loss,
right. Yeah,
right?
it's an
So it's,
acknowledgement, I would
yeah.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the built-in, full body response, I would say, that
Yeah.
God's put in our within us, obviously starting in our brains and
Mhm.
being located in our brains, but this response of the kind of feeling we have when we experience loss. So we want to avoid grief, but that's like wanting to avoid, like, good food or hospital or
Yeah.
medicine, right? So can you explain, why is it that our response to grief is the crisis, or what causes the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think, by crisis, I guess I would say, like, the weight, whatever that weight is, it just simply is. It simply exists. Like, there are just difficulties that all of us are going through all the time. I I am quick to remind us that this is not like the hardship Olympics. I mean, that's something else I can kind of fall into even as I wrote the book. Some of the hard things, some of the weights that I was carrying as I wrote the book in comparison to what some of my neighbors were dealing with. My husband is a chaplain at the county jail here. So a lot of the people in our lives live really they struggle in ways I have not struggled. And so there can be the temptation to feel like, "Oh, this isn't even that big of a deal compared to the way people are struggling and suffering around me or globally," or whatever the case may be. It's not a competition, and we know this, but I think we have to remind ourselves of that. And so whatever the weight is, whatever the loss is, it just is. It's there, it's ours. We might not have asked for it. We probably wish we could drop it and let go of it, and usually we cannot. And so grief is the acknowledgement of that pain that allows us to move through it. We just can't move through something in a healthy way that we're unable to honestly name or acknowledge. And so there is that little bit of nuance there where I am saying grief is one of my counterweights. Like
Hmm.
being able to sit in the grief, to sit in something that is hard, something that I cannot fix, I cannot make it go away. For whatever reason, this is my life today and I have to get through this thing. And so finding ways to kind of care for myself through that. I wrote about the funeral of a neighbor of mine, and he was a person who was unhoused. He struggled in ways that I have never ever struggled. His life was very difficult and also very joyful. And watching his close friends grieve the loss of him, the hole that that loss left in their hearts, they grieved honestly, they grieved in specific ways, they grieved in ways that a lot of people might be uncomfortable with, if I'm being honest, but I got to be there for that, and I learned from them, and I carry that with me, that we don't have to rush to, just to carry that analogy of, when we lose a loved one, we don't have to rush to the final conclusion of, they're with the Lord right now and they're so happy and we're happy for them, and all of that might be true. But what is real is that we're hurting and we miss them and we're sad. We might not understand. We might be confused. All of these different complicated feelings, we're allowed to sit in that and to take our time sitting in that. And I think God moves in really meaningful ways when we allow ourselves to be present to those griefs.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I think the more we avoid the ways that God has naturally given us to deal with the world,
Mhm.
um, and choose other ways, it probably is going to hurt us at some level,
Yeah.
and it might be difficult to figure out how much.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, yes, grief is one of those things that doesn't seem to go away when
Yeah.
you push it away. It
Yeah.
continues to come back. It doesn't let you push it
Yeah.
away. And it's funny because it kind of feels like in those moments, what we want is an explanation, right? Why?
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
times do we ask why? Why do we lose this?
Right.
Why? Assuming that if we got the answer, we would accept it,
Yeah.
right? That it would be acceptable to us,
Sure.
right? And maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. You assume that if you get whatever it is in God's plan, if you could see the whole thing, then you would agree with it. And I think that's probably pretty reasonable. But again, at the same time, like that longing for explanation as if the explanation is going to
Mhm.
remove the sting of the loss.
Mhm.
And why do you think that well, the Bible has given us, right, a tool
Mhm.
for grief. For grief, he's given, but the scriptures have lament, right?
Mhm. Right.
You talk about lament.
Mhm.
What does lament do that explanation can't do and
Yeah.
doesn't do?
I think we are wired. I don't even want to say wired. We are trained to seek a simple answer. And life rarely delivers those. That's something that I've had to work hard to let
Yeah, it
go
does.
of and to reroute in my own brain is that these ideas of simplicity and certainty, they're mostly uh, not achievable if we're going to operate honestly in this world. Most of life brings mystery and complexity and nuance and complication. And so I think that's kind of at the heart of this big question. It's just simpler. It feels cleaner to quote, just give it to the Lord.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to be trite or dismissive of that. I just think it's a little more complicated than that because we are humans with these bodies and these brains and these guts and all of these human emotions that we were wired with, right? And so to bring our full complexity as people, as just, bumbling, imperfect, trying our best people into the equation, it just automatically brings some complication and complexity into this whole deal that we try to write off as just, you know, heaven is happy. And so when people die, we're just going to think about heaven. We're just going to be happy. Okay, but I think that we are kind of burying that lament. We're not allowing ourselves to just be honest about how we feel, to be honest with God, to be honest with each other. It does not mean that we are mired in doubt. And honestly, sometimes we are. And I think that's okay to be honest about that as well. And so I think what lament brings us is the complexity, the level of complexity that matches our actual lives. I mean, it just brings a range of color and nuance and texture and meaning that simplicity just kind of writes out of the answer.
Yeah, I think simple answers, yeah, they often ignore major data points
Yeah,
that are really tough. And we're trying to always find things that are going to have enough explanatory power to make sense, right? Narratives
yeah.
or stories or explanations that will make sense of all of it, right? And I think that's the thing with grief. Like when you lose someone, it's like getting some explanation, right, from God, like as to like the thing that we want, like why did you let this
Yeah.
happen? Again, it's like it really does. I don't know why I'm sticking on this, but it really does like assume a posture about that in our current state we would accept the answer,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And I don't think there's any answer that would actually make sense to us. Maybe logically, sure,
Right.
if you have some kind of utilitarian, logic, and I understand that.
Yeah.
That's what make more reasoning really hard,
Yeah.
because it's not necessarily always the most logical, or at least obviously logical.
Yeah.
So, but I don't need to get on that. But this idea that, man, we when we avoid grief, when we avoid looking at things as they actually are,
Mhm.
we experience all sorts of pathologies that come because of this avoidance
Yeah.
and this lack of attention, really,
Yeah.
right? And attention, you spend a lot of time on attention.
I do.
And what you almost treat attention like it's a moral category, like
Mhm.
almost even a moral imperative. Why does what we notice matter so much? Why is
Mhm.
this such a big deal?
Yeah, I think to just sort of connect this back to the conversation on grief, I think when we are not attentive to what we are actually feeling and going through, I believe it creates some separation between us and God. I think it's a level of dishonesty that and I don't say that to mean, God is mad at us. I'm not saying it's sin. Um, but I'm simply saying w- I I believe we're closest to God when we're being really honest about what we're struggling with, what we're suffering. Um, and I think that connects us back to our bodies. One of the things that when I am on sort of a 3 book tear on attentiveness. I just keep coming back to it.
Can't
I,
get away from it.
I cannot get away from it. And
It's
it
important.
happened. Well, it is important. And it's something that, that's when I started looking at the sky. I mean, there was just a lot of areas
Hmm.
of my life when I just was kind of, I was living my life. I was kind of going through the motions in some ways, just, doing life the way we do day to day. In my personal study, I started to notice, and this was years ago, verses that said things like Jesus saw, Jesus heard, Jesus
Hmm.
felt. And so I at some point started just highlighting every time I saw those, those descriptions of Jesus living in his body as a man, um, through his 5 senses, just like we do right now. And it started to reveal a pretty striking pattern where Jesus was often being moved to action because of or through his 5 bodily senses. And again, I think we are wise to pay attention to these things because I really believe Jesus is our guide and our roadmap for what it can look like, what it should look like to live as people in bodies. And so I just started to get a little more serious about, and I mean this in the most literal, practical way. What am I hearing right now? What do I hear? What do I see when I stand in one place and just look around? I started to get like really curious as I was going through the gospels. Like, I wonder what things was Jesus smelling? What was Jesus tasting? We don't have a lot of like verbatim context for these things, but we have history and we have ways of sort of extrapolating some of that. And I think it became for me a really important exercise in trusting that, one of the first Bible verses I learned in Awana or something like that was John 3:16, for God so loved the world that God sent God's son. And I always interpreted that as, God sent his son to die. And at some point I started to understand that God sent his son to live in a body, not simply to die, but to live in a human body. And that must mean that our bodies are pretty important. That must mean that we have things to learn through our bodies and the ways our bodies engage with the world. And so that might be a bit of a long-winded answer to your question. I just think our bodies are constantly delivering clues to
Hmm.
us about things that matter, things that we need to be paying attention to, things that are really beautiful and joyful that are happening around us. It requires our bodies. We don't all have all 5 senses, but it requires our bodies to be engaging in the world in our exact proximity in our present places. And I think when we can start to key into that in really normal, ordinary, everyday ways, I think that's a connecting point to God.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, and I see a lot of the wisdom in that because attention is like one of the scarcest resources on the planet,
Yeah,
and everyone's trying to get it. They're trying to get your attention. They
yeah,
all want your attention. They want your likes,
yeah.
right? They want your watch hours. I mean, that's what's on YouTube, right? It's literally watch hours, right? So
Hmm.
you're not even like it's even getting down to the very where even just normal, right? People, they're looking at analytics and it's giving you
Yeah,
down to the amount of seconds that someone is looking at your thing.
yeah.
right? So think about that. We're getting
Mhm.
down to attention is so important that we're using measurements of seconds
Yeah.
in terms and wanting to put some kind of strategy to increase that in terms of seconds because they know on average, right, these seconds mean,
Yeah.
whatever it is that's going to result.
Yeah.
So it's like attention, we're trying to get it all the time. Where people are trying
Mhm.
to sell. You can't sell someone something unless they're paying attention to it.
Right.
And then you don't want them to pay attention. You want to get on a subscription so they don't think about it anymore. And it just keeps coming out. So
Right.
but you have to get their attention first.
Yeah.
And so how do you think for those listening and Christians, if you're a Christian listening, which probably most people are, but if you're not, thank you for listening
Yeah.
and being a part of this. What how is how are we being discipled in our
Mhm.
attention? How is our attention being discipled right now?
Yeah. So many of my counterweights, and again, they vary day to day, moment by moment, but so many of the counterweights I experience and many or maybe most of the counterweights I wrote about in the book require some degree of embodiment. Like, it I'm a person who does work on the internet. I understand everything you just said and, like, this fight to, like, get people's attention. I have a book coming out, and so it's like, you gotta get you gotta make sure people know, and that's part of my work, and I am grateful for my work, and I believe in the work that I'm doing, and the reality is, to the extent that I'm spending a whole lot of time staring at this little box in front of my face, I am disembodied. I am not actively, engaging my body with the world around me. I'm looking at something that cannot be in relationship and conversation with me in a real and true and meaningful way. Um, and so one of the things that became necessary for me and continues to be necessary to me is to find ways to actually put my body against the work, like, to not just believe things, to not just think things, but to actively engage my body with the world around me. This is why 7 years ago, I started working on staff at our community kitchen. I spend 2 days every week for the past 7 years chopping carrots and, putting cottage cheese into tiny containers to be delivered to Meals on Wheels, our elderly neighbors around our community. I mean, it's very physical work, and it connects me with my actual neighbor. It puts into practice the things that I say I care about. But even more than that, Josh, it pulls me away from this disembodied looking at a laptop all day, typing words or looking at a phone screen or whatever. It forces me into my body in ways that are profoundly meaningful and in ways that I would say have become sort of liturgical for me. Like, they are a really important way of connecting with God as I connect with my actual neighbors. Um, I don't know if I answered your question
I really
at this
like that.
point,
I mean,
but I mean, yeah, I think there's a any opportunity that we have to get out of our heads and out of our phones and into our bodies, it's it's meaningful and it's important, and it might not always feel that way, but I mean, I think there's often more value in me standing at my kitchen sink, even in an empty house doing my dishes, than there would be staring at my phone for another 15 minutes. And it's weird to have to say these things out loud, but we can choose to see those embodied moments, washing dishes, taking a break from the constant hum of information and activity and chaos, and to quiet ourselves and stick our hands into some soapy water. That's a counterweight.
yeah, I really like that because I actually am experiencing that more and more. And before this book, I didn't really have a word for it.
Right. That's the
In
thing. Yeah.
the sense like just this
Mhm.
longing to just be able to be out in nature or something like that.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
In the sense like not anything, I just to be there to actually Like I was talking to someone at the gym the other day, and they were saying, um, Bill Gates takes a week and does like just to spend with his thoughts. So whatever you
Hmm.
feel about Bill Gates, whatever. I know
Right.
that there's all sorts of controversy or could be, right? But we're
Hmm.
not getting into that right now. What I'm
Hmm.
trying to say is just as an example,
Yeah.
he goes and Bill Gates is rich enough that he gets to have his own, private whatever at some beautiful island where he gets to go sit there
Yeah.
and not worry for a week. So
Right.
not all of us can do that, but just this idea, like, oh my gosh, just your thoughts.
Yeah. That could be scary.
It is scary,
Yeah.
honestly. It is scary. And like this sense that like I don't have within me what I need. I have to go get it online
Right.
or
Right.
whatever, the
Right.
information.
The
And that
validation.
is
Yeah.
true. Yeah. And
Yeah.
validation. No doubt about that. And I think this attention thing is huge because our attention is a scarce resource that they're trying to get.
Hmm.
And our attention, how can we be discipled in anything
Hmm.
without attention?
Yeah.
There's nothing that we're discipled in without our attention. And so it is the things that we're paying attention to the most that are discipling us. And so if we are paying attention to political pundits, if we're going through and we're reading and we're going down the rabbit holes or whatever it is online, that's just continually feeding us
Yeah.
whatever social media thing, and it's just feeding us. That's what we are discipled by.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's going to affect how we eat, how we dress, how we spend, how we live, how we spend our time. That's
Hmm.
discipleship. So we are being discipled by outrage and
Yeah.
algorithms in the media. And that's scary. And we need to
Yeah.
move away from that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please. I mean,
Well,
whatever thoughts you
yes.
have.
I mean, I am a person who sees anger and outrage as fuel and as a tool, and that can be an unpopular opinion, especially
Hmm.
for women. Um, I think it has its place. I mean, I'm someone saying right now, if you are not outraged, if you are not angry right now, you are not paying attention, and I will die on that hill. I mean,
Yeah, I understand.
I
I
think
understand that.
there's a lot, so I'm like somebody that's always like kind of advocating for some outrage, but also we cannot exist on outrage. Like we can't. That cannot be all there is. I would challenge all of us to find your boundary. Figure out what works for you, because I just wrote something today that I've banned myself from threads for the next 24 hours for my own well-being, because I cannot keep myself out of there. As a little bit of context, my husband used to work for two United States congressmen. I used to work at the Heritage Foundation. We
Did you
are
really?
I really did. Yes. We lived in DC.
So you know Kevin Roberts,
I
or
don't know him now. I
but
worked
you know
there.
of him,
I'm
right?
probably older than him at this point. I don't know. I definitely know of him. We come from political work, and at the point
Interesting.
that I started to, decades later, pay attention to the most intentionally overlooked person in my everyday life, the most marginalized person, maybe. Some people might like that word better. I kind of like intentionally overlooked. Like they have equal value with me, but they have been excluded from so much of the decision making of powerful people. When I started to look to them as something, not as something, but as people who God uses to form us. I think God uses our neighbors. God uses us to form each other. Everything began to shift in me. Our
Wow.
politics shifted dramatically
Wow.
when we were finally forced to see up close the lives of people who are often at sort of the boot end of political policy. And so that's a whole other thing,
Hmm.
right? Like that's a whole other I don't know, episode. It's a whole other series.
Come on to Faithful Politics and talk about it.
Right, right. I mean, it's
For real.
been a wild ride, and it's, this is decades now for us in the making. I would say 15 years ago is when a lot of these shifts started to happen. But again, my point is it's very important for people to stay clued into politics. If there is one thing driving me bananas right now, it's people who voted in the election, for example, but are now saying they're just staying out of politics. They're just not paying attention to it. Not okay. Not good enough. Like, we have to stay engaged. We have to be paying attention. But we should be sort of, for one thing, I believe we should be allowing our faith to guide our politics and not the other way around. For
No
another
doubt.
thing, I think we should be contextualizing politics through those people in our world. I mean, not everybody's neighborhoods look the way my neighborhood does.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
to be contextualizing political policy through the lens of excluded and unheard people is mandatory right now.
I think that's really, really good. And I think that looks just like Jesus. And it doesn't like wherever we come down, right? We're thinking about immigration, we're thinking about the ICE crackdowns, we're
Yeah.
thinking about all this stuff that's happening, right? And no matter like where you fall, even on like a policy, it's like the ends, like the ends justify the means kinds of argument doesn't
Mhm.
work because the means always shape you,
Yeah,
inform you into the kind of person you're going to
that's right.
become in the end.
That's
And
right.
so if your method is torturous and if your method is dehumanizing,
That's right.
you will dehumanize,
That's right.
because even if the end that you have is great or it would be awesome or it, theoretically help a lot of people or be the best, quote unquote, whatever that means. You can't detach ends from the means in which they're achieved.
That's right.
And right now, my appeal to my Christian brothers and sisters is let's think about the ends that are being used right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the means that are being used right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Okay, you want the end. I get it. Borders are important. Okay,
Mhm.
the whole argument, and I know this is getting beyond, but what it does though, how it does connect though, and what I would like to hear from it, I'll finish what I'm saying, but what I'd like to hear from you is how counterweights are helping in a polarized,
Yeah.
exhausting public square,
Mhm.
but you're looking at this and it's like we have this this policy, whatever it is. I hate the way that some of these things are being defended biblically. I think they're not
Yeah.
very good the way they're being defended. They're not
Agreed.
good exegesis.
That's
They're
right.
not good exegesis. So, but you can't ignore the means. You
No, you
can't.
cannot.
You cannot do that because it will shape you and it will show the witness.
That's right.
And our witness is being absolutely destroyed, in my opinion.
Man, is it ever? I mean, to the
Yeah.
point that we are trying to extract, I won't even say Christian character, just like decent. At the point that we're trying to extract just common
Just
decency.
decent character.
Yeah.
I mean, just like baseline.
If you have to pull that out of your equation, you cannot convince me that those ends are sort of baptized by God. Like, I see a lot of that happening. Like,
Oh yeah.
well, but this is, politics, and I mean, we mash them together when we want to. We violently separate them when we want to. I think of the book, I forget the author off the top of my head, but the book, The Power Worshippers, that really helped.
Oh yeah. No, we interviewed them on
Oh,
here. Her
good.
name is
Yeah, it's a
Catherine
woman.
Stewart.
Yep, that's the
Catherine
one.
Stewart. Well, I've
That
met her several
Whew.
times. Interviewed. She's amazing.
That book was a pivotal book for me. I mean, I am an avid reader, and so there are so many books that have helped to shape me. But really going back, educating myself. I mean, that's one of the things I realized was there is a whole lot that I was never taught. And I'm not talking about theology. I'm talking about like history,
Oh, yes, history,
just like
big time history.
humanities, like so many things. And so here I
Yeah.
was in my 40s, my late 30s, early 40s, realizing I don't know anything. I mean, I was writing. I was on the team of people writing welfare reform related policy. And I did not know anyone that I knew of, at least, that was a recipient of welfare. That's a problem. Like
So you've got to come on Faithful Politics, by the
I'd be
way,
happy
and
to. I'd
talk
love to.
about this.
I'd
We've
love to.
interviewed we have several people from the Heritage Foundation, but 2 presidents of the Heritage Foundation.
Okay.
The senator or the guy who was in office, he was a politician. Why am I forgetting his name? We just
No,
did it.
I'm with you.
And he was the president of Heritage Foundation, and then Kevin Roberts. But
Yeah.
sorry, but
Yeah.
you really, I mean,
Yeah, I'd love
I
to.
would. That
Let's
would be
do it.
really, really cool.
Let's do it. We
And
have a lot to talk about.
We have a lot to talk about, and we tried to get the Heritage Foundation to come on and talk about Project 2025. They wouldn't actually do it.
Yeah.
Which is
Well,
funny.
and they have their new report about like saving America by saving its families. Have you seen this?
I
Look it
haven't
up.
yet.
Look
I'll
it up.
look
I
it
spent
up.
it's like I mean, it's so long. I spent so much time and I won't
Isn't the
even
one
say
900 pages, the Project 20?
well, it wasn't that long, but I want to say it was like 160 pages. I mean, it was really long.
Smokes.
So I will not go on the record saying I read every word. I read a lot of them and I did start
Sure.
skimming because I had other work to do, but it's all right. I mean, it's something like that's something I would say anyone who's resonating with anything we're saying here, look
Yeah.
it up, at least find a summary. I mean,
Absolutely.
the Heritage Foundation holds a lot of power in a Republican-led government, period. And I was alarmed by this latest report. It just came out a couple weeks ago. Look it up and read it through. I mean, this is where our attention is required. It is not good enough to sort of opt out right now. And so, yeah, I would encourage everybody to look that one up.
Well, we'll have you on to come talk about your experience there. That would be really awesome. I
Yeah,
can send you
I'd love to.
the link after this. But even thinking about though, like thinking to be the counterweights, where does this fit in our polarized, exhausting public square? It obviously does,
Yeah.
but what do you want to encourage people to think about in terms of counterweights and their engagement in the craziness that's happening right now?
Not everybody is going to share my politics or my theology or my worldview. And I don't expect that. But I do believe every single person needs a counterweights practice. No matter where you are on any of those spectrums, it's just hard to be a person right now. I mean, I am personally impacted right now by some of my close relationships fraying because of these divisions that are happening. That's hard.
Yes.
I mean, that's a heavy thing. That's something that
I feel that big time.
and we have to grieve it, right? Like that goes back to the grief part of
Yeah.
the conversation. Like to name, this is painful. And it's it consumes our time and our energy. No matter where you're at, you're dealing with some of these things. You're not to mention, I mean, we have, I have friends who've gone through really painful divorces very unexpectedly. I have friends who have lost
Yeah.
loved ones, family members, children. I have
Yes.
friends struggling through terminal illness. I have a lot of friends struggling through addiction. I have friends who are unhoused. I have, the list goes on and on. I live in a very immigrant rich community and neighborhood that is weighing heavily on me. So I can't even imagine how
Yeah.
that's weighing on some of my neighbors.
Same.
And so,
I mean,
right,
same for your.
it's hard. It's hard. So wherever you're at, finding, grabbing on. It's not even about like, here's this whole new concept that you have to learn and figure out. Like you said, Josh, we're already doing it. We're trying to find things that help us stay fully present and fully human in a world where it just feels hard. It's hard to stay tender, and I think we have to stay tender and present. We cannot check out right now. And so the
Yeah.
counterweights practice is here to help us keep going forward, to continue to love this life enough that we will fight for the best of it, that we will fight for our own sanity, but also for the well-being of the people around us. If we can't hold on to just that essential love for this life we've been given, we're not going to effectively fight for, God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. I think as believers, as Christians, that's what we're called to do. So just be looking around you. There's a quote, one of my favorite authors, she has a book called Jesus Freak, a book called God in the City, and Take This Bread. Sarah Miles. I knew if I kept talking about her, it would come to me. She has a
There you go.
quote, God is always happening. It's just this short little quote in one of her
Hmm.
books that I've latched onto. I think counterweights are also always happening. So it's not about going and starting a new thing, buying a new thing, finding a new thing. It is about being present to the life you already have, present to the life you're already living, and realizing that that daily, ordinary, everyday life is giving you what you need. If we can slow down and name it, and now we have our name, like if we can find our counterweights, it gives us that pause to catch our breath, to regain our strength, to rest a little bit, whatever it is that we might need so that we can keep moving forward as the kingdom of God.
I really, really, really like that. Where can people, but is there a preferred vendor that
Yeah.
we have?
Y-
And then how can people get involved with you and follow you and your work
Yep.
here?
You can find the book linked in a whole bunch of places on my website, shannonmartin.com. I personally am a big fan of supporting your local independent bookstore. I use Bookshop a lot. I do still use Amazon some. Whatever you prefer, it's going to be linked on my website.
Sure. Nice.
Do what works for you. Um, if you order the book within the first week of its release, there are some like great little bonuses for you. I just finished recording the audiobook yesterday, so I did read the
Nice.
audiobook. That'll be available. So yeah, you can find your book wherever you find your books, and you can keep up with me through my Substack. I write a Substack called The Soup. I have also a free weekly email that goes out. It's a short little 500 words or less called Counterweights Weekly, where I specifically focus on a political a political weight from that particular week and one
Hmm.
of the counterweights in my life. So it's just sort of like I honestly created that back in November just to offer some solidarity with
Yeah.
a community of people who are like, for example, in my family, I'm the only one that even knows about this. They all think I'm crazy, whatever.
Huh.
A lot of us are
Yes.
in sort of that realm. And so this is sort of geared towards those of us who are wanting to be really honest about the grief and yet also illustrating the practice of finding that counterweight. So you can sign up for all these different things. You can find me on Instagram at Shannan Writes. I'm very active there as well.
Well, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Shannon. It's been an absolute pleasure to connect with you. Thanks for coming on and sharing some with our audience.
I loved every minute. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And to our friends, guys, thank you for being here. Make sure that you go check out the description, show notes, get the book, share it with other people, share this episode with others. Thanks for sticking with us. And guys, until next time, take care and God bless.
Mhm.